right. Good morning, everyone. How is everyone doing? Good morning. Doing well. Good, good. We are in the middle of our series called More Than Enough, and it's really a series where we are working on preparing our hearts for this season of Thanksgiving and the season of generosity. And it's really a series that starts with this reminder about God's abundance, that because God is this generous God and He is generous with us, we can then be generous with others. We can be generous with our time and our gifts and our resources. And today's actually the last day of this series, and so we wanted to conclude in a unique way as a response to this series and a response to God at the very end. And we're going to have some time of sharing from the congregation at the end. But I wanted to remind us of what we've been doing in this series. We've been looking at the narrative of Genesis where God is sort of in this process of reestablishing His abundant kingdom through the family of Abraham and Sarah. And as we've looked at this narrative, we've seen this original calling that God has given to Abraham, where He said, hey, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to give you land and I'm going to give you a family. But He's really specific. He's not, I'm going to bless you so you can hoard it all. It's, I'm going to bless you so that you can bless the whole earth, that all the nations will be blessed by Him or through Him. Now, this was a really big promise to give Abraham this land and this blessing and descendants, and it was huge for so many different reasons, and there were so many obstacles to it happening. For starters, Abraham, just like us, lived in a world that was filled with grief when it came to providing enough to just stay alive. The ground wasn't always going to work with him. And for sure it didn't. As we read the story, we saw that there was famine that cropped up. And even when there wasn't famine, even when he had an abundance of animals, there wasn't enough land to feed the animals. And then things were very, very messy. How was he supposed to be a blessing to others when there was either a famine or it was flooding? How was he supposed to do that? And on top of all of that, he had the emotional turmoil and grief of a family and a child, or lack thereof. In the face of all of these things, many times Abraham, just like Adam, faltered to trust God. Faltered to trust that God would provide. And instead of trusting God, he actually took that which wasn't given to him, and he did what was wise in his own eyes rather than just waiting on God. But God is so good. God is so good that even when Abraham and Sarah failed to trust God, God was faithful. And this is what God does. God keeps working with them. He even continues to bless the things that are the byproduct of their failures, like Ishmael and Hagar. Because God's abundance is great enough to reclaim all things, even our missteps and our mistakes. And then last week, we actually joined our sister church, The Movement, in Columbia, Maryland, for a joint service together. And for those of you who weren't able to join us, it was lovely. Their hospitality was top-notch, and they were so encouraged and honored by those of you who traveled all the way to Columbia to worship with them and let them receive you. It was a great, great time. For those of you who weren't able to join us, or are only able to join us typically online, so you weren't able to be there through our live stream, we continued our series by looking at Genesis 22. And Genesis 22 is sort of the final climax of the Abrahamic story. After many decades of Abraham and Sarah, trying to figure out what does it look like to trust God, trying through trial and error to figure out how is it that we wait on God's promises. God brings Abraham to this point where he realizes that that God is going to be faithful even on the other side of death, that even death is not going to stop God from being more than enough, from blessing the entire nations. And so we get this bizarre but really powerful foreshadowing story of Abraham, who places this tree on his son, his one and only beloved son, Isaac. And they walk up a mountain together in order for him to become the sacrifice. And the entire story is dripping with all of these signposts that point to God's one and only and beloved promised son, Jesus, who would carry a tree up a mountain to become a sacrifice. And in the story with Jesus, what we see is that God truly is more powerful than death, that not even death can stop God from blessing all of the world, all the nations. And this is sort of the final story and the climax that invites us into this journey to develop a relationship with God, just like Abraham and Sarah had. They walked through chapters 12 through 21. And they tried to figure out and test and realize and misunderstand through trial and error, what does it look like to trust God so much, to trust that God is going to provide no matter what the challenge is. And to trust, and what does it look like for us to learn that Jesus is removing all and every dead end spot so that the whole world can be blessed. And that you and I, we too are being invited to participate in this journey of proclaiming and demonstrating the abundant blessing of this more than enough God. And that's what we want to talk about today. That's sort of where we want to end. We are being invited to participate in this journey, in God's journey to bless the world. And when you think about that, honestly, that's a pretty absurd thing. Like, hey, I need you to help me bless the world. Because it's weird that God calls us to be about that. It's weird that God calls us to live these lives to proclaim and demonstrate his abundant blessing to the world. Because God doesn't need our help. Like, this is the weird thing. God doesn't need our help. God owns everything. God can accomplish whatever he wants, with whatever he wants, however he wants, right? If God wanted to bless someone, he could just go, poof, you're blessed. If God wanted to deliver somebody from hunger, he could go, poof, you've got enough food. If God was like, I want to free you from debt, he'd go, poof, freed from debt. Right? If he wanted to say, like, hey, we're going to end all the wars, poof, God ends all the wars, right? Like, God can do this on his own. If he wanted somebody to no longer struggle, he'd say, poof, you're off the struggle bus. This is what God would do. Why? Why then does he want us to join him in this process of blessing the world? It's absurd. It doesn't totally make sense because he doesn't need us. So why does he invite us into this? Because that's just how God works. Do you remember the story of the woman in the Gospel of Mark who gave her last penny? I'm going to read it. It's in Mark chapter 12. It says this, that Jesus was with his disciples. He had lots of conversations with lots of people about money that particular day. And Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put, and he watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people there threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents, calling his disciples over to him. Come on, guys, come on, come over here. Jesus said, truly, I tell you this poor widow, she has put more into the treasury than all of the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she gave out of her poverty. She put in everything, all that she had to live on. Now, in this narrative, she wasn't even giving a lot. But what amazes Jesus is not the quantity of what she gave. It was that she recognized that even though what she had seemed very small, and maybe in her own economy, it was inadequate, God was still asking her to use it to bless others and to trust that he was going to provide the rest. And by giving, she's sort of saying yes to God, and Jesus recognizes it. He points it out to his disciples. He calls it out among all of the other gifts. Do you remember the boy who gave the 2 fish and the 5 loaves? This is in John 6. When Jesus looked up and he saw this great crowd, amounting in like 5,000 men alone. They were all coming towards him. He said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" And he asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was doing, right? Remember, God, poof, you're fed. He can do it, but he just wants to ask, where are we going to get the bread? Where are we going to get the fish? And Philip answered him, "Oh my gosh, Jesus, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one of them to have a bite." For each one of them to have a bite of bread. And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. And Jesus then took the loaves and gave thanks and distributed it to those who were seated, as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. Now, what was the point of the boy's fish and his loaves? Again, Jesus, poof, he could have fed everyone. Jesus could have fed all the people from nothing. And yet, there seems to be this sort of important thing in mentioning the boy's lunch, that this boy gave up his lunch. That the boy was even brought to him by the disciples and said, like, "Hey, this is all we've got." And the boy said yes to Jesus who needed it. And as small as it is, Jesus takes this small amount and he blesses it and he feeds the masses. Do you remember the story of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey? This is in Matthew 21. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage in the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there, with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." We know from the story that whoever the person was that owned the donkeys, like if they asked a question, they had obviously said yes, because the next thing that we know is the story of Jesus riding on that donkey and with the colt. And they're riding into Jerusalem, making this entrance into the city as this victorious and conquering king. Jesus asked, and the person said yes. Jesus invited this person to participate in God's redemptive mission to bless the world, and the person said yes. And if you think about it, Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the generosity of an ordinary guy who had a donkey and a colt and was willing to make them available to Jesus. And this is the way that Jesus works. Jesus can advance his kingdom in Clarksburg, or really any city in the world, any way that he wants. But he chooses to ride on the abundant generosity of ordinary people. He chooses to ride on the generosity of people who give their time and their talents and their money to advance the kingdom. And that is absurd. Why? It's absurd. But do you also remember the story of the guy who provided the grave in which Jesus' body was laid? It's in Matthew 27. As evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him. Joseph took the body, he wrapped it in a clean cloth, and placed it in his own tomb that he had cut out of the rock. He rolled a big stone in front of the entrance of the tomb and went away. Now, we don't know much more about Joseph, other than he was also a ranking Jewish leader. But he gets written into the story, not because he was important, not because he was rich, not because he did something earth-shattering. He, and all the others that we've mentioned, get written into the story of God because God invites them to participate, and they say yes. It's our generosity that writes us into the story of God. God invites us to participate in his story, and when we say yes, God weaves us into the story that continues to be written. But sometimes, what it takes in order to say yes to this more than enough God is trusting him. And sometimes what it takes to trust him is to hear the story of others who are trying and practicing and trying to figure out, what does it look like? Stumble and fail, not perfect, but here I am trying to trust this more than enough God. And so what we're going to do right now is we're going to share some of those stories. We're going to have an opportunity to hear about what God is doing in the lives of this congregation right here, these people. How we are trying to say yes to God. How we're trying to say, hey, I'm going to trust this even though it's really hard. I'm trusting with my time. I'm trusting with my talent. I'm trusting with my resources. I'm trying to trust God. And my hope is that this will create a time of proclaiming the goodness of God, proclaiming the ways that God is more than enough. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to have a mic here. It's right there. And you can take the mic, and we're going to invite people to come up and share. And I have 3 prompts that, like, hey, if it fits in this category, this might be a helpful way for you to know, like, yes, I can answer that question. I can do that. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to think, if you can share, a way that God has blessed you to bless others. Okay, that's one type of story you could share. 2, a way that you are practicing, maybe through trial and error, trusting God with the little or the much that has been given to you. 3, a way that you are waiting for God to be more than enough. Okay, so those are sort of our 3 prompts. They can go in lots of different ways. But we've done times like this where we've had congregational sharing before, and I always kind of do a little bit of a like disclaimer of like, hey, this is kind of the guidelines, if you will, of how we're going to structure our time and what this is going to look like. So I wanted to go over those guidelines really quickly before we jump in. First of all, if no one shares, that's okay. If it is silent up on this stage for however many minutes, that's all right. That doesn't mean God is not at work, but that just means that we're not sharing today. And that's okay. You haven't hurt my feelings. You have no need to rescue this time, so don't feel the pressure to make it happen, okay? This is empty space for us to share, and if we have sharing, great. If not, that's okay. The second thing is, remember you're bragging on God and God's people. Sometimes it can feel really self-conscious to say, this is how God has blessed me, right? And that's not what we're doing. This actually isn't about you at all. This is a story about God. This is a story about the people of God. So this isn't about like, we can lay down that whole idea of like, I don't know. It feels weird to say, hey, look what God has done in my life, when for somebody else, maybe God hasn't done that for them. And that is true. I do not know the answer to why God answers some prayers with a yes and some prayers with a, that's not the right thing right now. I don't understand that. But sometimes what the people who are still waiting need to hear is the story of God being a faithful God who does open up doors, who does walk with people. And so don't feel self-conscious, because this isn't a story about you bragging what you have. This is a story about bragging what God has done. And if you think about the story and you're like, wait, this is really not about God at all, this is really about me, then don't share that story, okay? We want to brag about God and God's people. All right, the other thing is you're going to share at an appropriate intimacy level, okay? Now, if you're like, I don't know what that means, let me explain that real quick. There is a room full of people here. Some you may be close friends with, and some you may not be. Additionally, we are live streaming this thing, so I don't know who is watching out there. Right? That is not to make you feel really self-conscious. That's to give you an appropriate understanding of like, don't stand up here and create this forced intimacy moment where you're like sharing more than is appropriate to share with the audience that is in front of us. Does that kind of make sense? Do we understand what that means? Okay, good. I wanted to clearly. Last one, no bow required. If your story does not have a complete ending, so did Abraham's and Sarah's for decades, right? It does not need a complete bow package on top, right? It can be like, hey, here is how I am trying to trust, and here's the trials and errors that I am making, but I am still waiting. I'm still trusting. No bow. And then that can be the end. That can be it. We don't have to wrap up stories that God is still writing, because that's kind of the fun of it, is to see, I'm on the edge of my seat. What is God going to do? Okay, so I'm going to put the prompts back up there so you can kind of think about what that would look like. Also, our online friends who are joining us online, if you would like to contribute your story to this, if you have a story or a prompt and you're like, oh, I wish I was there and I could share it, I'm going to encourage you to type it into the comments, because we have somebody who's hosting our online space this morning, and that if they get one and they have time, they can come up and they'll be able to share that as well. Okay, so I'm going to sit over here, and again, we're not going to feel awkward about this. We're just going to recognize that if somebody has something to share, great, and if not, that's okay too. All right? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire. Ooh, bright lights. So I wanted to talk about money, and I will admit, I feel like money is one of those things that I often feel like me and my husband, it's like we should have total control of our money, right? Because it's like, we know what our wages are when we work. We know how many hours we work. We know how much money should come in. We know how much our bills are. We know how much, we usually spend on food and things like that. So it's like, that feels like we should have total control over it. However, as I'm sure we all know, that's not how it works. And sometimes I feel like we've always gone through these seasons where one or two things happen. Either all of these unexpected costs come out of left field, right? And it's like, oh, the car broke, and then somebody got injured, and then we had this unexpected bill come in from, I don't know, the HOA or whatever tax thing. And then it's like, oh, where did all the money go? I thought we had control, but where did all the money go? And then it's like, it's this humbling reminder that hey, everything that you did have was given to you, and it can also be gone at any time. So that's very humbling, because it gets rid of this notion that I have sometimes that we have control and we deserve what we have and we did this and we got that, and it kind of dismantles all of that. And then the other thing is, sometimes we go through these seasons where there's money coming in that we didn't have control over, and it's like, oh, you accidentally paid too much for some bill, and now they're sending you a check, and oh, you got some gift or something, and it's like, where did this money come from? And that again is a humbling reminder that everything that we have is given to us, and that we didn't do anything for it to deserve it. And in our capitalistic whatever, it's it's hard to separate that. But I'm setting that up to say, especially over the last few weeks, and I have both been feeling called and convicted to be more regularly giving with our money. Every time money comes in, money needs to go out to be given. And that's something that we've never really done before. And so I was really honest, and I said to him, I was like, it's a little scary for me because I've never done that before. And, you know, maybe selfishly, I think like that money that we would be giving, we could be like padding our savings account for the next time the unexpected bills and expenses come in. But I know that that's just a test. Like, I know that I just need to have faith that like everything that we have comes from God. And like as we bless others, like we will still be taken care of. And so that's kind of the like untied bow. And just to like wrap it up, sort of the most recent thing was that just this week we had another week of like, hey, where did that expense come from? And like, oh, the car's broken? Okay, like all these things. And then I was like, came in to my work from home office one day and was like telling me about all these things that suddenly we needed to pay for. And then I was like, this timing seems suspicious, like that all this would come in just as we're talking about being more generous. I was like, I think this is like an extra like test of like our faith. So that's kind of where we're at right now. It also just so happens that like we got a letter the other day that was like, guess what? One of your regular bills is being lowered. So I was like, okay, so God still is like looking out for us, even though like we're being very, I guess, brave and being generous and being nervous about it and just trusting that God's going to look out, and he is. So that's my untied bow. That's all I have to share.
So we have one from online. God has intervened in so many ways with my health issues. And now she's praying for him to be more than enough with her husband's recent diagnosis of Parkinson's. She says, I give it all to God, and I'm blessed even in my darkest, not feel so good days.
Oh, that is bright. Hey guys. So I don't really know what to say, but in 2019 I was diagnosed with cancer and kept coming back a bunch of times. And it gets really easy to like dwell on like how horrible life is, I guess. And my wife and I think we just kind of started to lean into God more and more, and it kind of, just got us where we are now. And it's been 3 years now, I guess, since 2, thank you. 2 years since I've been diagnosed with cancer, and my wife is pregnant now, and she's saying stuff to me, I don't know. But she's pregnant now. Like, luckily one of my first doctors was like, hey, you should freeze sperm. So I mean, because of all of my treatments and stuff, I can't really have kids anymore. But we did freeze sperm in 2019, so we are going to having a little girl in February. So I just want to say, I mean, it's like I said, it's so easy. I mean, the lady earlier was saying like her husband has Parkinson's, and like when I was first diagnosed and just the subsequent diagnoses, it's just so easy to be like, oh, this is it, you know. And at a certain point, I had, I think, like a 30% chance of living, and maybe even less than that, because it ended up in my brain. But hey, here I am. So there's just so many things that, like, I mean, I could go on forever. I promised my wife I wouldn't, but there's just so many little things that, like, happened in life that led me to here. I mean, I'm such a nerd, and it's kind of a long story, but because I play Pokemon Go so much, I found these doctors who also play Pokemon Go, and because of them, I ended up in a clinical trial because I needed that, and, like, I ended up in a clinical trial in like 3 days, and some people that I met in that clinical trial took them over a year to even like get to where I was in 3 days, because I play Pokemon Go and because I met these doctors and like because I play a bunch of other video games. So my wife can't really say anything to me about playing video games anymore. So, like, hey, you don't know, I'm playing Call of Duty right now. This could save my life somehow, you know. Yeah, but yeah, all right, guys.
I'm going to say what everyone's, oh my gosh, it's so bright. But I already know. So you guys see these two TVs that are mounted? Isn't this beautiful? All right, so like a month and a half ago, Beth and Anna's not in here, we were talking about what needed to be done on the stage. Said, hey, Alicia, you're gonna figure it out and you're gonna do the thing. And my first thought was, oh God, I am not enough for this. And it's true, I'm not enough for it. But God has equipped so many people with skills and talents that we don't share the same. And just out of nowhere, hey, I know how to do this. Hey, I have ideas for this. I mean, and then mom and other people from the congregation just started to use their skills and talents and come together to put things together for the stage. And it's not even all the way done yet. It's still happening. The bow is still getting tied. But it was just, and I think we need more batteries. A realization that God will use his people, but you have to just remember that God is in control, and if you allow him to move through you, you'll see you have enough because of him. And it might not be just through you, but it may be with the people that you fellowship with or the people that you are walking next to. So that is my more than enough story.
What's up, y'all? One way that God has blessed me to be able to bless others is one of my friends is going through a troubled time right now. And he's really given me the courage and the ability to be able to comfort her. And yeah, I wouldn't have been able to do this last year, but this year, I feel like God has really come into my life to be able to help others, and yeah, he's just been blessing me with a lot of different things, blessing me with meeting people that need help, or people who are going through a hard time right now, but yeah. He really blesses you, and even when you least expect it.
Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. Living in a world of infinite, overtired, we can really forget things. When where we put our keys, where we were, appointments were made, what we had for breakfast in the morning at first, and even forget the names of people that we know well. It's nothing can afford, but we live our lives more than forget the benefits of the Lord. When forget what God has done for us in the past, we lose hope of the future and because discouraged. However, when we turn ourselves to God and He saves our soul, awesome with prayers, and not only needs faith in renewing and our hearts overflowing with thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving's coming now, and I thought this would be nice. Bringing Thanksgiving journal is a great way not to forget God's blessing, as well as at least your awareness of the presence in your life. Take a moment at the end of each day to renew and note just how beautiful the sunsets are, and they've been beautiful this year. Particularly pray. I guarantee that you will start looking things in a thankful way and more thankful that you've become. Try it. It might just change how you see life.
Hello. I'll be quick. I have been thrust into a leadership position at my job. It's stressful. Typically, that's how it works. I don't usually ask for it. Usually, I'm doing it, and somebody's like, "Hey, you should do this." And I'm like, "All right, I guess we're here." So that's where I am now, doing something that I guess I should be doing because the Lord has put me there, but it's very stressful, and I'm trying to have the best mentality about it because I was very good at not being in charge before. So my brain wants to be like, if you just fail a little bit, maybe they'll take it away and you can go back to chilling. I'm not joking. That's so serious. So prayers for me, this is something that God's working on with me, is to be okay with not being in control and not assuming that not having control means failure is coming. So yeah, that spoke to somebody.
Hello. I run a Dungeons and Dragons game for some of the kids here and in the community. And this is sort of a mutual blessing because I've seen over the past year these kids just really lean into their creativity and crafting these stories. And it has just been absolutely incredible to see their minds at work and to give them an outlet to create. God has really given me a great opportunity there. And I have been blessed that one of them, several of them actually, have expressed interest in this, but we are having one of the students run next month's game instead of me, which is an incredible blessing to see the impact that you can have on people.
Hello. Wow, those lights are appropriately bright. Not too bright, but appropriate. And I just wanted to say something quickly, jumping off of a statement about kids and students in your life. So on our street where we live, there's no sidewalk, and there are a number of families that have kids, our kids' ages, but there's no sidewalk. And so when we first moved there, it was like, man, this is a bummer, because number one, how will our kids meet the other kids on the street? And how are we going to then get to the houses of the kids on the street? Because there's no sidewalk. However, the kids are still coming. The kids are still like, hey, can we hang out? Hey, this is my mom and dad's number. Hey, let's set up a play date and let's hang out. And so then I'm like, yes, this is awesome. But then I look around at my tiny little house that is like forever and always a construction zone, slowly getting better, but also still very much a construction zone. And there's this little demon that creeps up and it's like, don't invite those kids over. Your house is terrible, right? So then I'm like, oh, shoot. Maybe I should say no. Like, I don't want my kids' friends to come and see like all these things, because then I know how the conversation will go. It'll be like, yeah, this is, welcome, whatever. My dad's fixing this, and this thing, and there's a hole over there, but like that's gonna be a something eventually, And meanwhile, I'm just like the wheels are turning in my head of like, this kid is like, I will never come to this house ever again, because why does this look this way? Yeah, so I think, and I mentioned this to the group that I was sitting next to a Sunday or so ago, but I really think like that's God like trying to drive home a message of like it ain't about your house, right? Like the kids just want to have a place that's safe. The kids just want to have a welcome environment, and they just want to have a safe place to hang out. And your house seems to be fitting those three criteria. So like, it's going to happen, right? The stuff's going to get finished. This thing's going to get patched up. That thing's going to get painted. Whatever the case may be. But just be faithful, and just keep saying yes to, the kids that I'm placing in your kid's life, because those relationships and those connections on the street are more important than, you didn't paint your bathroom ceiling. And, it's been that way for 8 months, right? So, but yeah, just being faithful and being patient with the things that God has blessed you with.
Hi. One really big way that I think God has blessed me to help others or bless others is I have a friend, very close friend. We've been friends for years. She is my closest friend. And when we met first, way back in middle school, she was not really in the best mindset. She used to be really down and really upset. And if you see her now, you wouldn't think that. She's really happy. But just back then, it was just really bad, for her. And she was in a really bad place. And we talk a lot, all day, every day. And whenever I'm upset or she's upset, we're always there to listen and just sit down. It's like, hey, do you want to talk? No, I don't feel like talking today. That's fine. I'm here if you do. And when we do, we don't hide anything from each other. We tell each other what's going on. And she often lets me know that when I came, she's glad that I came when I did. Because she said that even if I wasn't there physically, just me talking to her through the phone or messaging, I really helped her out of that bad space she was in. And she's really happy and she feels lucky that I came when I did because I helped her out of such a bad situation that she was in. And so I feel like that's God blessing me to bless others, because I feel like that was the plan, that we would meet and that I would help her out of that situation, so that now me and her can be best friends and we can hang out with the rest of our friends like all the time. We go to each other's houses. So I feel like that was planned from God, because I came in a time when she needed someone and I was there for her, even if I wasn't there physically. So I think that it's a great example of how God uses people to bless others.
Thanks so much for sharing, for those of you who shared. And I always think it's so encouraging to hear the stories of the things that are happening in the congregation. I am particularly blessed by hearing the voices of some of our younger people. And if I was not the pastor and I was simply congregant Beth, I would also come up here and share one of my stories. And I want to share what that story would be. Well, is because I'm doing it. So a little behind the scene curtain peek is that I, last year, probably in August, not this past August, the August before that, in September, I have always had a heart and a passion for our middle and high school students. There haven't been many of them, but I wanted to meet their needs, and I wanted to make sure that they had a space where they felt known and loved, and they had an opportunity to know God and grow in their trust and faith of God. And so I was committed that it didn't matter if I didn't have the time to do it. I was going to make it happen, and we were going to have some sort of student ministry opportunity here at the church every week for those students. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And everyone that is very wise in my life said, Beth, you don't have the capacity. You don't have the time. And I said, but what are we going to do? We've got to do something. And I remember we had a meeting right over here with a couple people, both the parents and some people that I thought might be interested in helping with this thing. And in that meeting, my point was to convince them to help me make this happen. And in the meeting, what I actually confessed was, I can't do it. I am not enough to make this happen. I do not have enough time. I do not have enough bandwidth. I can't do it. And they said, yeah, but we can. And Patrick and James and Jacob and Stephanie and Giorgio and Nathan subs in sometimes, this whole group of people, and since then Emily has joined, this whole group of people have met faithfully with our students every single week. Guys, every single week. They've met faithfully with our students, building relationships with them, teaching them, coaching them, playing ridiculously funny games with them, and then additional times where they've met up and done Dungeons and Dragons and different things like that. And I am so, so very grateful. And for me, that is this reminder that God's enough, I'm not enough, but we're enough. And so I'm just really, really thankful. And hearing the stories that are coming from our younger voices are just this reminder that God is on the move at all ages and all of our people. So I'm so grateful for that. Thank you for those of you who are sharing. Thank you for participating in this time. This too is a part of our act of worship, to proclaim and demonstrate, God, this is what you're doing. And this is the ways that you are more than enough. I'm going to pray, and we're going to close our time together with one final song where we just get to express our worship and gratitude for this more than enough, God. So if you'll pray with me. Father God, I am so very, very grateful for who you are. I am so very grateful for the ways that you are moving behind the scenes in each one of our lives, but it's adding up to this bigger kingdom impact. It's adding up to this bigger movement of the Spirit, where we have an opportunity to demonstrate and proclaim, look, all of the nations of earth will be blessed because of the things you, Father God, are doing, the ways that you are calling us to trust, the ways that you are providing so we might give generously to others. Father, I understand that the reason why you invite us into this, even though you could do it yourself, is because we are transformed in the process. We are drawn into a deeper relationship with you in the process. Of course, you could do this all your own, but you want our hearts. You want our minds. You want all that we are. And so here we are, Father God, we offer it to you as this living sacrifice. May it be holy and pleasing to you. We pray all these things in your holy and your precious name.